Very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Sauradeep Sarkar, your host for today's webinar. It gives me immense pleasure welcoming you all to the live webinar on the theme of Accelerate Business Opportunity and Growth with Power. This webinar is hosted by Cybermedia Research in association with IBM. For the duration of presentation, all participants' line will be in listen-only mode. And after the presentation, we will be having a question and answer session. Your feedback is very important for us, so please submit your feedback at the end of the webinar. Now I would like to hand over the floor to Mr. Anil Chopra, Vice President Research and Consulting from Cybermedia, who will share his insights on the way forward for BFSI in the era of disruption. Thank you, and over to you, sir.
Thank you, Sauradeep, and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on Accelerating Business Growth and Opportunity with Power. To set the context for today's webinar, I'm going to start off with a quick market overview of the kind of disruption we're really seeing in this segment, in the BFSI segment, what sort of impact it's having, and what we feel companies should really be doing to differentiate themselves to really thrive in this era. So I think there's a big change that is happening in the BFSI scenario today. A lot of recent developments have happened which can have a lot of implications for most of the companies, and the incumbent companies, traditional companies in this space. For one, there is this growing ecosystem of startups, whether it's for finance or fintech or insurtech. There's payments banks coming up. There is new digital payment methods that are coming up. All of these are actually showing new ways for consumers to do transactions, and actually there's a change in mindset of how they can really do financial transactions. This is also the era when competition can actually come from anywhere. For example, in Flipkart recently has been seeking approval to sell insurance policies online on their platform, and there is automobile dealers are now able to get license themselves as motor insurance service providers. So there's a lot of difference and changes that are really taking place over here. And of course, government and RBI, they're playing very, very active roles in redefining how these services should be offered. There's the JAM Trinity, which is the Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, and Mobile, which so far, we have, I think, achieved already 1 billion Aadhaar registrations. There are the 200 million bank accounts. 700 million phones are expected to be, go live by 2020. So a lot of changes, a lot of things that are happening in this, sector. And, there's RBI's recent announcement also of what a bank branch should really be like. It's no longer the traditional branch that we have really, been used to thinking of. Whereas what they have defined is that, it's a fixed service point or a delivery unit that can actually just provide basic banking services. It could be a business partner. It doesn't even have to be owned by the bank. And so long as it's open 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, it is called as a bank. So a bank branch. So that is the kind of change that we're really, really seeing. And, we are also seeing that, more than 50% of the global retail banks, expect digital investments, whatever they've done, to yield measurable results by 2020, according to an Infosys Finacle EFMA research report. So much changes that are happening, and which obviously is also very much, visible with the kind of disruption that is happening. And, with consumer mindset changing towards how, banking and insurance can be done. There's a lot of change globally as well, where banks are actually closing down their branches or planning to cut down their branches because, consumers are more comfortable with digital banking or online banking. So if you look at Societe Generale or RBS or, even PNB, there's banks are actually closing down or, shutting down the branches to save the costs. And another report suggests for the insurance sector that about 31% customers are actually now relying on, solutions offered by insurance tech companies, according to a, World Insurance Report. So that clearly indicates that there's a shift in consumer preferences to online with whoever can offer better services. So that is a kind of change. And if I speak of the fintech and this entire ecosystem, if you'll notice that there's so much growth happening in this area, and they're actually disrupting just about every aspect of the BFSI space. So whether it's merchant services or whether it's consumers or government or personal finance, there are actually startups that are coming up who are identifying and tapping all those, niche and unexplored opportunities that either didn't exist earlier or they were not really offered properly, by the traditional companies. And of course, the whole payments space is, of course, in one example, but there are, of course, so many more. And, it's not as if it's just the startups that are gaining from this. Banks who are actually reacting fast enough to these opportunities are also gaining a lot of benefits. So the question really is that comes, to mind today is how do you really differentiate yourself? These developments are actually making the market more competitive. So you need to be able to differentiate yourself and actually become a disruptor rather than, becoming disrupted. So one thing that we can notice is that, one look at identifying those niche opportunities to be able to unbundle the services that are actually available and, be able to utilize those niche opportunities. And it's not as if that, you can go ahead and unbundle them and run them on your own. There's obviously cooperation or competition that is a, more common term today, to be able to work with fintech or insurtech startups to be able to, offer those services and start developing expertise in those niches. Now, so if you look at some of the examples, I think Paytm is a very clear-cut case of, who could have really thought of that payments could be actually converted into a such big business. And similarly for a lot of other services, aggregators like Bank Bazaar or Policy Bazaar, who are actually now giving consolidated loan options or, insurance policy options from various traditional players, and they're actually making it easier for customers to choose from. So, their success of all these are very clearly visible from the response that consumers are really giving to them. So recently, Bank Bazaar mobile app actually crossed 1 million downloads as of June this year. On the UPI front, in September, it crossed 3 crore transactions, which is an 85% increase over August. So that is the growing popularity of online payments and some of these, service providers who are actually offering various types of services. Now, like I said, banks are actually partnering with this ecosystem using UPI and who are able to do it fast and, they're fast enough, they will obviously benefit. The challenge is that if you are not fast enough, might end up doing cost cutting and, some of the scenarios we just saw earlier about closing down branches as we just saw, so that is something that, this can lead to if you're not fast enough. So this actually, if you look at it, is actually taking competition to a whole new level. And companies have to be agile enough and in the market to be able to really compete and gain benefit from all the new opportunities that are being offered by these new digital channels. So I think that's one thing, to be able to unbundle services and evolve partnerships to be able to grow. And of course, learn from innovations that are being offered by others. And because there are, companies who are innovating or identifying the gaps and actually filling those gaps and starting offering those services. Union Bank of Philippines, for example, they recently opened the ARC, which is a fully digital branch that doesn't have any teller counters. So instead, customers are given tablets or even VR glasses when they enter, and depending upon the service that they actually desire. So it's a whole new experience that they're actually playing on for their customers. No tellers, they just get their tablets. If they're looking for, say, a home loan or an automotive loan, maybe they can actually, wear the VR glasses to get a glimpse of what is there on offer and so on and so forth. A lot of innovative things that are being done by these companies. This other one is a very interesting and a new one, which is called Toffee, which is a new microinsurance player who's actually offering microinsurance for all everyday moments. For example, getting an insurance for dengue, or a commuter toffee, or a globetrotter trophy. So they're actually targeting the new generation in a completely different way, and they're making the process of buying insurance as easy as buying a toffee. So interesting, innovative models that we're actually seeing emerge by all these companies. Of course, internally for companies, it's best to, since transformation cannot really happen overnight, it's important to identify specific areas, whether it's marketing or whether it's process improvement, is it product innovation, is it customer outreach. It's important to identify, those BUs and identify specific business problems to address, and then look at how actually technology can play a role, which is actually where, technology really comes in, because it's the backbone to enable all this innovation, and it must be chosen with care. And of course, as you could probably see in front of you, there are so many different options to choose from, and you can do it once you've decided where the innovation is required and which specific business process you want to, digitalize. And we're seeing banks across the world using many of these services and benefiting from them, whether it's chatbots or robotic process automation. Blockchain is a new entrant in this space where a lot of companies are now experimenting with the technology. Big data and analytics, it becomes useful, to analyze huge amounts of data, like giving customized insurance packages or identifying even credit-worthy customers for a loan, increasing credit card limits, etc. So there are these lot of technologies that can actually become game-changing and actually benefit, so they can be looked at. And of course, be able to add new skills into the team. For example, some new skills that can be inculcated into the team are design thinking, or being able to manage the channels, to design the customer journey, and look at scenario analysis and planning. Some of these terms were probably not even heard of maybe a year ago or so, but these are now coming in and becoming very important for companies to really look into it and embrace. So, but the question is, since there are so many technologies, you can identify, you can innovate, but the point is that, is your infrastructure really ready to handle all of this? You need the right infrastructure to make all this happen, and which is what a lot of companies are currently struggling with. According to a recent survey of about 300 global banks by Infosys, the top 3 innovation challenges were actually legacy technology, system integration, and the time and cost that is required to move from concept to reality. Now, given all this, how ready is your infrastructure to handle all this changes that are there? How quickly can you go to market with new offerings? I think it's time to move faster and actually become more agile, which is where I actually end my presentation and hand it over to the next speaker, Devendran Pandian. He's the business leader, pre-sales solution, cloud and cognitive at IBM. And he's actually going to talk about agile infrastructure for digital transformation. So thank you so much for listening, and I now hand it over to Devendran.
Thank you, Anil, for your introduction, and it was actually really insight, and you have set the context clearly for this transformation process. So if you look at the current scenario, so every business actually is in the tipping point. We have to, banks are talking about completely going digital, going forward. Probably the banking app you have in your mobile could be your branch itself, because you can do every function what you are, or every service what you are going to do with the bank, you can do it through the mobile itself. So when we are actually looking at that transformation, we are actually clearly at a tipping point. So the technology is now becoming the platform for innovation and business value. It is not about the way we decided earlier, what is the platform, how do we decide and stuff like that. It is clearly about the technology becoming the innovation for becoming the business, creating business values. And if you look at the investments, what typically IBM has done, specifically considering the transformation and the disruption which is happening in the technology space, we are clearly making the investments to, and as we understand the customer infrastructures and what the business model, what the banks and the financial institutions were doing, because IBM is actually one of the organizations which is predominantly present in very strong in the banking sector, BFSI segment. We actually are running core banking for several of the banking institutions as well as the insurance players. So we know what is the actual requirement of these customers, and aligning to that how our platform and the digital transformation, the way we are going to support it, we are actually clearly investing into that, and we are actually moving quickly into that. For example, if you look at it, we did a survey with a C-suite across the globe. So 80% of the CXOs are clearly saying that they are actually experimenting on different business models, and 95% of the enterprise software companies are clearly talking about incorporating one or more cognitive technologies, which is actually could be related to doing a larger set of analytics, creating insights, and also creating new business models and supporting the innovation which the digital transformation has to happen. And if you look at what are the key parameters we need to look at when we are going to do it. Obviously, it is actually a mandate for every financial institution at this point in time to actually transform into the digital business. While we are doing that, there has to be two parameters which needs to be clearly looked at. One is actually how we are going to actually do the business cost optimization, and also looking at IT cost optimization. These two actually has to be very clearly looked at when we are actually doing the business model, and the conversation what the IT team of the banks are going to have with their line of businesses are completely different compared to what it was 5 years back. 5 years back, it was about an application. What is the application? How are we going to run it in an infrastructure which is comprising of a server, storage, and other interconnects. But currently, the way the expectations from the line of businesses is, this is the innovation I'm going to do, this is how it is going to happen, and the IT team actually becomes more of a supporting function, and actually it can bring in a lot of innovative things into that optimization. And if you look at the challenges faced by the IT teams, currently it is actually, there are a lot of challenges, because when you are running a traditional workload in your existing setup, the challenges were completely different. But in the current day scenario, where the transformation is happening, there are a lot of other additional challenges also are there faced by the IT teams. Specifically, one, actually the data volumes are increasing, and you need to be looking at how we are going to manage the data. And then there are a lot of complicated license policies from different applications and the OS and the other things what we have. Importantly, from a BFSI point of view, one, actually it has to be a highly available solution. So basically, when it is business critical, you cannot allow a downtime or unplanned shutdown for the entire infra. At the same time, when we are actually doing digital transformation, it has to be agile. Agile is actually, it's not about getting the entire solution or the innovation 100% on day one and then roll it out to the customers. It is about actually starting small, and as the things proceed, making changes and getting the infra aligned according to the changes what is required. That is actually clearly the system and infra should be clearly agile. At the same time, the scalability point of view, that is actually another critical part which is coming in, which actually means that when you have an infra, if you are adding 3 or 4 more additional workloads, or you are trying to scale additional features, or trying to introduce additional services into that, then the entire infra should be actually scalable to support that. So now on a broader side, if you look at BFSI environment, there are actually 3 different areas we can actually classify the workloads actually. For example, if you take a new workload which is actually having a lot of new data structures, significantly increasing heterogeneous environments actually, then this needs to be operated at faster and much faster access to the information. These are the key criteria or characteristics of these new workloads, which means that the infrastructure what we need to decide or select for this particular workloads should be really flexible enough to actually adopt to these variations. The second is the traditional workload, whether it is the core banking, whether it is actually the insurance sector core applications, or the traditional workloads what we are running could be the traditional internet banking and the traditional workloads. Here it is about increasing the performance, and there is actually a lot of security requirements is required, because the way the ransomware and hacking and a lot of credit card and debit card thefts which are happening, a lot of online frauds happening. When you are actually looking at all these things, a lot of regulatory bodies like RBI and other regulatory bodies across the globe, they are actually clearly putting clear mandates on security requirements. So the traditional workload infrastructure which you are currently running or which you are going to run, that actually needs to be really secure. And also it actually demands a lot of capacity management and integration. That is actually the key characteristics of these traditional workloads. So typically we know how we are running these traditional workloads. We have done for a long time on these traditional workloads. Only thing is what is important here is actually when the platform which you are selecting for the traditional workload should be much smarter than the platforms what we have been using. And the third area which actually the workload which is typically the system intelligence. It is about the artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, and a lot of decision making the system itself is doing, where actually you you have the customer, you know the customer's characteristics, what sort of pattern he is, what is his net worth level, what are the insurance policies he is having, and all the information is already there. If we are able to use these sort of system intelligence to actually cross-sell and upsell or additionally sell some services on top of this, that is going to actually generate an additional business revenue for these BFSI clients. So what is required here? These are the characteristics of these system intelligence workloads. How we need to design a platform? The platform should be really high-performing platform to cater to this particular workload. So in general, the workloads can be classified into three. One, actually the new workloads, which is about new data structures, which needs to be faster and it needs to be accessed faster. Then the traditional workloads, which actually needs much better performance and security, and also look at capacity management and integration. And the third is actually the system intelligence workload, which actually is getting into the artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning. So if you look at where is the data coming from, when you actually say the data is growing and it is a lot of them are unstructured, if you look at actually the center bottom part where actually the conventional data platform existed in BFSI, any banks or any insurance organization, we always had the systems of record, which actually typically had an RDBMS, OLTP, and the structured data where you had the customer database transactions and stuff like that. And then there was a systems of insight which actually provided you the view of how the customer pattern is, what is his actually net worth level, and how he is spending, whether he is actually doing a lot of online transactions or he is withdrawing a lot of money from the ATMs, and a lot of insights was created, and based on that insights through the personal relationship managers, banking segment actually try to reach out to the customers, offering a particular specific customized service to the customer. This was the conventional data platform which was there earlier. Now the data sources are completely new. Like for example, the data is coming from social media, it is coming from mobile, it is coming from sensors, it is coming from different locations. So this data actually created the need for actually creating new data models, and a lot of new age databases are actually evolving right now. So all these new age databases, actually cater to the newer workload where actually specific analytics or specific machine learning or a deep learning, any sort of this thing has to be done. These actually databases are supporting that. It is actually slightly different from the conventional systems of record databases. What is the client value clearly on this particular thing? It is about greater scale and speed, and it is also should be open source. It should be a DevOps model where actually everybody from the customer to the development team to the banking institution, everybody are involved in the entire process of evolving over a period of time, and it has to be born on and designed for the cloud. That is actually the characteristics and the client value which is evolving out of this modern data platform. Just to look at open source databases which are actually running on the enterprises, what are the changes are happening? If you look at the growth in the past 3 years, a lot of these open source databases actually have grown significantly. Some of them are actually 100+% growth. So the trend is very clear. Customers, the traditional core banking, the traditional workloads what the BFSI segment were using, that is actually continuing as it is. There are a lot of other new digital services which are evolving, and for those digital services, clearly these sort of new open databases are explored, and a lot of banks actually are currently doing proof of concept or a proof of technology based on this with the different platforms. I'll actually pause here for a minute, and I have a poll question. Can we have the poll question on the screen? Yeah, thank you. So this open source, the question is how much of open source database applications are you using in your organization? So could be, you might be already using a lot of open source applications, whether you are exploring or evaluating any of these open source databases, or you are already using it. Just answer or respond on this poll. Okay, thank you for your response on this poll. So if you are actually looking at this particular transformation which is currently going through, there has to be actually focus on a lot of open source and open source databases. So what IBM is actually doing here? So this digital transformation has to be supported by the open source community. So IBM actually is part of this open power community, where actually we have members like Google, Samsung, Micron, Tian, NVIDIA, Mellanox, all these are part of this particular group. We have around 275 members across 26 countries, and we have a huge amount of ISVs part of this, who are actually developing their application. This application could be related to any services, it could be related to any of these analytics or machine learning or deep learning. There are around 2,000 plus ISVs they are developing based on Linux on Power platform, and this particular ecosystem actually is going to help in the creating the innovation value what IBM is trying to do along with this particular community. This is just to give a view of who are the players and under what category who are part of this. There are a lot of HPC research community members into that. Software vendors are part of this. System integrators are part of this. I/O storage acceleration boards and chips. So all levels we have. What is the objective of this is actually all these people in their respective domain, they can actually develop their solution or the innovation what they are trying to do based on the IBM Power architecture. So this is actually growing like a great community, and there are a lot of new age digital transformation workloads and solutions are actually coming out of this. At the beginning, I spoke about the IBM's investments specifically supporting this digital transformation, and this is just to give a view of what IBM has invested till now on Power 8. Typically, if you look at the number of years of development of Power 8, actually it's around 3 years, and Power 9 is actually going to be announced soon. And there are actually, if you look at the specifically on the Linux and the open technologies, the investment has gone already is closer to $1 billion. So that's the level of investments IBM has done into this. And if you actually look at specifically on the Power 8, let's actually a little bit talk about the technology part of it for a couple of slides. The categorization is actually into three. One is actually the scale-out systems, which actually is a dual-chip module, and there is an enterprise system. Typically, most of the core banking solutions, whether it is a Finacle or banks, everything actually is running on the enterprise class system. And there is something called LC systems, which is actually based on the open power chip. That typically the new age digital workloads predominantly actually runs on that actually. So all these actually are designed for memory intensive workload, because the workloads what is currently there, it is about processing large in-memory databases, large virtualized environment, and also it is actually doing a data in motion analytics. So which means that memory bandwidth and the workload which is going to run on this is actually really memory intensive. So if you look at the total socket and the bandwidth, it is actually more than 2.5x times compared to any other competitive platform which is there. So there are actually a lot of workload accelerators. So typically these actually come into picture when you want to run an artificial intelligence system or a machine learning, deep learning system. A lot of banking institutions are utilizing this. For example, the government today actually made an announcement that actually they are actually correlating the existing GST data, what they have got, along with the income tax data. Basically, they are trying to correlate the indirect tax versus the direct tax data, so that they can actually, it can red flag the tax evaders in a big time. That's actually going to come in 2018. There are already the platform and the things are already set. So with these sort of analytics actually needs a lot of processing and performance. So if you look at the IBM Power, this is actually along with the open power, we have the development is with NVIDIA is NVIDIA co-accelerator can actually part of the system, where actually majority of the application things is done by the processor logic, and the rest of the things actually it actually offloads to a GPU. So by actually combination of these two, actually the number of data which can be processed in a short span of time, and the performance what is going to be delivered, it's around 4 to 5x times compared to the traditional systems. So the next slide, I have just given a high-level view of the IBM Power Systems Linux portfolio. Predominantly all the new age workloads, everything is actually runs out of this. It could be the LC line specifically designed with the open power ecosystem, and the L line runs only the Linux workload. And there are enterprise systems which actually can run both the traditional Unix, which is the Power AX from IBM, or the Linux workload in the same system. So this shows the complete Linux portfolio from IBM Power. I have just given, I'm not going to get into the technical details of all these systems, but just to give an overview, the systems on this specifically related to the big data, because all the banks or all the financial institutions actually have lots of amount of data and customer information usage patterns. If we are able to actually utilize these innovations available, these data which is available with us, to actually actually used with the new age innovative workload like the AI or a DL or a ML, it can actually lead to a lot of insight, and it actually can help in the business transformation. So if you take the LC AS82 to LC for big data, that actually a typical system which actually can be utilized for an artificial intelligence. For example, if a customer wants to start small, they can actually start it. As they start and they progress, they can actually decide when, make the corrections and they make the changes and then keep on moving on. Next slide talks about the NVLink difference. This is actually the part of Open Power. We have worked with NVIDIA, and with this actually Power8 is with the NVLink technology. When you look at this, this actually is going to be a key contributor, and this is going to be a game changer for all the big data related analytics workloads, where you actually the bandwidth on the between the GPU and the GPU to GPU and the GPU to CPU, it's around 80 Gbps, which is compared to 2x, 2.5x and 3x times compared to the previous platforms. So this is going to be a major booster for delivering the performance which is required for the new age workloads as well as the system intelligence workloads. While ML, DL, and AI is actually applicable for cutting across a lot of industries, specifically to the banking and financial services, this can be utilized very well, because this actually can, like I said, government is evaluating to actually correlate data between the indirect tax and direct tax. Same way, actually, each and every banking system or the insurance system, what they can do is they can actually look at the customer data usage pattern and actually look at a customized service offering to the customer, or otherwise actually looking at a completely new business model. This actually will help them to deliver more revenue with the existing customer itself. So upselling and cross-selling actually becomes a lot of possibility in this particular thing. So if you look at the data analytics stack on the high performance, on top you have the applications. It could be any of your banking applications, and if you look at the Power AI as a framework, it actually is there is actually a hardware platform which actually is with a power processor as well as the GPU, and there is actually an AI framework on top of it. So that AI framework has supporting libraries, deep learning frameworks, which means that if actually any of the customer or any of your workload you want to actually look at implementing AI, the entire AI framework as well as hardware is actually coming as a single solution, single stack from IBM Power, and you can have your applications running just on top of it, which is actually a sort of ready to use sort of Power AI machine, and which can extend to DL and ML. So coming to the characteristics of the modern data platform. So if you look at the modern data platform, it is actually extremely parallel. So which means that we already are actually having a lot of parallel executions, which is actually in our existing workloads in the latest applications. But the new age is only about parallel. So which means that these parallel executions has to happen. For that, what is the requirement or characteristics on the hardware platform? It is about having number of hardware threads. For example, if you take an IBM Power Platform, each and every core can execute 8 threads at a time, whereas the other platforms can execute one single core can execute only 2 threads. From a number of hardware threads, it is actually about 4x times higher than the other platforms, which means that which is ideally suited for all these big data analytics and the parallel execution of this modern data platform. And the next characteristics of the modern data platform is about multiple data streams. Data streams are actually coming from different sources, and it is actually multiple. And for handling that, you need to have a larger cache as well as a higher memory bandwidth. From a memory bandwidth point of view, again, it is actually 4x times compared to the other available competitive platforms. So that is also an ideal fitment for this particular modern data platform. The third characteristic, it's about humongous data. Data is everywhere and it is about data. For handling the data, the platform should be really having a good I/O bandwidth. So that actually bandwidth is actually available with the IBM Power Platform. So IBM Power Platform, if you look at the I/O bandwidth, it is again 4x times in terms of bandwidth, and adding with the NVLink NVIDIA solution for an AI or an ML or a DL sort of workloads, you can actually deliver 4 to 5x times compared to any other platform. And the last characteristics, it's about key to business, which is actually very important for any of the banking sector workloads. It's about reliability and availability. It has to be reliable. It has to run 24/7, 365 days without any downtime. The only downtime which is affordable is actually a planned downtime, which is actually a specific planned activity. Otherwise, in general, the platform should be available 24/7, 365 days. So if you look at the clear characteristics of all these modern data platforms on the modern day workload which are there, the hardware platform has to have these sort of features, which could be the number for parallel execution, number of threads should be high. For handling multiple data streams, it has to be having larger cache and higher memory bandwidth. For handling the huge amount of data, you need to have a higher I/O bandwidth. And for the running it in 24/7, 365 days, it has to be reliable and available. So while you might have already had a view about or know about all these open source databases, just to give about details of what are the different databases available. Some of them are in memory, some of them are NoSQL, and there are a lot of open source. All these databases actually are explored in detail in the BFSI segment. So this platform is clearly designed for delivering the breakthrough performance which is required for the new digital transformation. As I mentioned, it is about 4x threads compared to x86. x86 actually has a technology called hyper-threading, where it is called as simultaneous multi-threading in Power. So each and every core can handle 8 threads at a time, whereas hyper-threading is only 2 threads at a time. So which means the number of threads is 4x times per core. In terms of memory bandwidth, it is actually 4x times in terms of compared to the x86 pipe. And in terms of more cache and lower latency, it is again 4x times. On top of that, all the things which is required for the new digital workloads, everything is actually supported by the open source or the open power community, which helps us actually deliver a platform which is designed for the digital transformation specifically for this segment. So these actually just to give a high-level view of what is the performance difference what you will get against a competitive platform. If you take a MongoDB, it is 2x times, EDB it's around 1.x, 8x time, and then if you take Hortonworks, it is around 1.7. So the performance difference is huge actually on the on this platform when you look at the complete workload, which is actually the platform, the OS, the database, and your application on top of it. If you take everything as a stack, complete stack, it is actually more on an averaging it around 2x times compared to the competitive platform. I'll again pause here for a minute, and I have one more poll question. Can we have the poll question, please? Thank you all for your response. And just to give some customer references and examples which are running on open source database and Power, while we have examples on MongoDB, Redis, everything, I'll just take a minute on this EDB specifically, where you have actually NPCI, National Payment Corporation of India, actually is running on IBM Power 8 plus Enterprise DB on their application. So this is currently live and running with NPCI at this point in time. The next example, actually, this is actually MongoDB running on a Power 8, which if you look at the platforms, whether it is actually, if you take the server price, system cost, and the number of operations per second, it's actually 1.68x times, almost closer to 1.7x times better in a price per performance comparison. The next example is on Enterprise DB. Here again it is 1.8x times. So in all these workload and examples, clearly compared to the competitive platform, you get around 2x times better performance compared to the competition. The next example again is on Hortonworks. So this is I have taken this example to show that it is actually, it's not only about a specific database. It's not about a specific operating system. You might have already experienced the Power AX on any of the databases and what is the performance, what is delivered, which is live currently running in several customer sites. These actually are examples of actually the new age open source databases running, and what is the performance the Power Platform is able to deliver on these. So if you look at the platform, when we are actually designing the platform, okay, while all the banking sector customer or any customer for that matter, they will actually have a mix of all these workloads. Like for example, the traditional workloads are not going to go away; it is going to continue as it is. But there is actually a new big data and analytics workload which is coming up big time, and at the same time there are new cloud native applications which is also evolving and it is also thriving, which could be the container or Dockers and APIs and stuff like that. So the infrastructure what we are designing, it has to be actually able to support and run and deliver performance on all the three workloads. It cannot be that actually this platform is can only run the traditional application, or it cannot be running only the cloud native. So the platform which you are actually designing, that should be able to actually cater to all these three workloads. I'm just again recapping the digital journey drivers. The new age workload, it has to be actually flexible, and the traditional workloads, it has to be smarter, and the system intelligence workload has to be highly performing. So the platform should be able to deliver and cater to all the three different workloads, which is going to be coexisting at any of the banks or any of the insurance companies at this point in time. So the Power infrastructure, which is actually clearly designed for catering to all these three, this is actually clearly going to give the required performance. It is going to give the required RAS features. It is going to give the required flexibility for whether you are going to actually running a traditional workload today, and tomorrow if you decide to actually use the same system for porting one of the new age workload or on an open source database with Linux, the same platform will be supporting that, and it is actually going to deliver much higher performance compared to the previous platforms. So with this, I would like to say thank you to all. Thank you for joining, and let's take any questions if you have.
Thank you very much, sir. Please, over to you, Mr. Chopra.
Yeah, so thanks a lot, Devendran, for that presentation. We are now open for Q&A. So if there are any questions, please, you can share them on chat. Or alternatively, Sauradeep, could you please guide them for all the people who have dialed in from the phones to how to ask questions?
Certainly. So ladies and gentlemen, should you wish to ask any audio question, please press 0 and 1 on your telephone keypad. Alternatively, you may send your questions in the chat panel, which is appearing on the right-hand side of your web console. I would like to repeat, participants, if you wish to ask any audio question, please press 01 on your telephone keypad. Alternatively, you may send your questions using the chat facility.
So Devendran, what is the cost of these servers? So for example, you mentioned that it gives 2x performance for MongoDB as compared to the similar thing running on an x86. So what would be the cost?
Yeah, and specifically taking these LC systems which are actually designed and running Linux specifically with these open source databases. These platforms actually almost, the cost is almost similar to that of an x86 system. So it will be very competitive compared to x86.
I see. Okay. And what kind of, you mentioned, okay, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so so what kind of, there are various new applications that are coming in this space, right? And companies are actually playing around with them. So what are some of these new applications that you're seeing and, adoption of in the Indian BFSI space? AI seems to be there, chatbots are there. So what are you seeing?
Yeah, right. Actually, I'll tell you, currently there are 2 or 3 different pilots going on with large private banks in India. And if you look at I can mention the name State Bank of India, which is actually a largest public sector bank. They are actually rolled out the SBA app actually in just flat 3 months. It was developed and it was actually, while it is the actual production runs on a enterprise system, it was actually developed and the initial porting everything actually they tried out with that smaller systems. That is one thing. Second thing is, if you look at the private banks, 2 or 3 of them actually are in pilot and one of them is about to go live in the next week. They are actually, what they are doing is they are actually using IBM Power along with IBM Watson. So Watson is actually the other one which actually is a learning platform which actually able to respond to customer queries to 90% accuracy. So basically any of the customer reaching out to the banking website for a specific thing, okay, while we know chatbots are there, chatbots actually can, that they also learn and respond to customers. Watson actually adds a lot of strength to that, where actually it can you can actually teach Watson over a period of time on the patterns and the questions. If there are specific asks from the customers, what sort of responses we need to give. So it can give closer to 90% accurate information and it can generate patterns. So these sort of things are currently going on, and some of the customers actually, one of the private sector bank in India, what they are doing is they are actually trying to use the artificial intelligence and based on the Power Platform, what the pilot they are trying to do is they are trying to actually correlate the existing customer data, what they have, and actually create a customized service offering to a customer. Say, for example, if a customer is actually is using his credit card for dining frequently, so this can actually create a small offer for the customer saying that if you are going to dine in these places, you might actually get so much of benefits or a discount or something like that. So they are trying to do a different pilot, actually trying to create a customized service for the customers. So these are the things, multiple things are actually going on, while we are also talking to a lot of other insurance and banking sector customers specifically on this. Those are actually in the initial stages where we have actually had a workshop with them, discuss what could be the areas with what is their long-term strategy and how actually these solutions can be helping them in innovating their business model.
Thank you. Sauradeep, are there any questions from the audio bridge?
No, sir, there are no questions on the audio and neither on web.
Okay.
Okay, we have one question on the web.
We are not able to see that. Can you please ask? Okay. So the question is from Santosh. Which OS versions are certified to run on LC systems?
Okay, so Linux, it actually supports Red Hat, SUSE, Ubuntu, and CentOS. The detailed versions of these actually are available publicly in the IBM website, where we have actually updated all the supported compatible operating systems against this LC system is listed. On a high level, Red Hat is supported, SUSE is supported, Ubuntu and CentOS is supported.
Okay. And what if somebody wants to migrate an existing application from an old legacy system onto one of the Power servers? So how long would that take, and what sort of support can one expect?
See, if it is actually, it depends actually. If it is actually a traditional standard application, it should, IBM has the IBM's lab services, where actually that team actually helps customers to migrate from one platform. It could be competitive, it could be running a different operating system to actually migrating to IBM Power on AIX or IBM Power on Linux. That lab services teams has skills to do that. In general, if you actually have, it is actually a standard application and a standard operating system and DB, it should take anywhere between 7 to 10 days to actually get the initial setup done to actually for the customer to do the testing.
So if there are any more questions, so please go ahead and post them on the chat window, or as Sauradip mentioned, I think dial 01 on your handsets to ask an audio question. We will wait for 1 minute for anybody to ask a question. So there is a question again from Santosh, which says, what differentiates a scale-up versus a scale-out LC model?
LC model is actually a scale-out system. So in general, a scale-up system means if you want to add more cores or CPU or memory or any of the IOs and disks, it can be done within the same system. So typically the IBM Power E880, E70 are called a scale-up system, where the scalability and expandability is much higher on the enterprise level. And if you take the scale-out systems, it has actually a limited scalability, and for adding more performance, you need to add one more system to it. For example, this LC system is actually more of a scale-out system than a scale-up system.
Thank you. I hope that answers the question for Santosh Mohile. If there are any other questions, we'll wait for 1 minute for people to ask. Please gather your thoughts and ask us the questions.
So at this time, we have no more questions from the audience. I would like to turn the program back to you, sir.
Yes, thank you, Sauradip. And I think with this, we will conclude the webinar. Thanks a lot, Devendran, for sharing your insights on the IBM Power Systems and for answering all those questions. We hope that the attendees, all of you, got the answers to your questions. If you do have further questions, please go ahead and reach out to us. We'll be happy to get them answered. We would be sharing a recording of this webinar with, all the attendees. So thank you, and we do hope to, come back again with more interesting and useful webinars. Thanks a lot, Devendran, and thank you all the attendees for joining us on this webinar. Have a very, very good evening. Thank you so much, and goodbye. Over to you, Sauradip.
Thank you very much, sir. So on behalf of IBM and CMR, I would like to thank all the participants for joining this webinar. We hope you all spent a useful time with us. Request you all to kindly submit your feedback form, which will appear just after this session gets over on your web's console. Thank you, everyone, once again. Wish you all a great day ahead. Thank you, everyone, for joining in.